The first story that I have is not. I'm gonna share one of the tweets actually that I just found rather than the top tech story today. This one's just too strange to be true. A Chinese man whose last name is Ma, like Jack Ma, like the most famous guy in all of China, if not all of Asia, has been detained. And the news that this man named Ma that was detained wiped $26 billion off of Alibaba stock. But then it turns out this was not Jack Ma at all. It was another Ma, which in a country of more than 1 billion people, I guess you're going to have more than one guy named Ma.
They're like 100,000 ma in one province.
To further dispel concerns, the Global Times reported the accused man was born in 1985 in Wenzhou, while Jack Ma was born in 1964 in Hangzhou, and worked as the director of hardware research and development at an IT company. And the market's roller coaster reaction is the latest sign of just how skittish investors are getting over China's embattled tech sector, which has been a target of Chinese government heavy-handed regulatory crackdown since late 2020.
So could I just get clarification here, Tyler? Is the story that this gentleman called Ma was arrested and the reaction from that wiped off a sizable portion of the value on the market?
Let me explain a little bit why people in China would think it's Ma Yun, because normally in Chinese state-supported media, if they say Ma X, I will replace that X means they replace the name with an anonymously character. So Ma X means the guy has the name with two characters. So after the official announced it's not Ma Yun, so they changed the name into Ma XX. So it's a bit like maybe BB Home. So you have a middle name in your system. It's BBA Home, BBB Home. Then you know it's two different person. Then you won't suspect it's Ma Yun. So at beginning it's just Ma X. So that means that guy has a name with only two Chinese characters. That's why everybody think it's Ma Yun. But after this, they changed to this Ma XX. So along with this clarification, so it's very obvious it's not Ma Yun, but that is Jack Ma. So, but it's normally they wouldn't. I mean, the state-backed news media wouldn't make this kind of mistake. So it's still suspect they did it intentionally to make people mistake it's Jack Ma, and then let Alibaba's stock price to fall like this.
But even if it's not Jack Ma Yun, right? Could it be Jack Ma's long distance relative, because they can have the same surname?
Yeah, but the first news was very vague. So it just like I said, it's Ma Mo in Chinese. It's Ma Mo. Mo is Morgan Mo. That means somebody.
So it's a different surname.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Phoebe, that is amazing clarification. Thank you so much. That's really good.
That's
really good.
Chinese we understand it immediately, but in English it's hard to. I think it's hard to translate into English articles.
It's easy to jump to conclusion.
Well, now your explanation, like the way that you've described it and how it's so integral to the identification of the people there, like your assertion that potentially it may not have been completely accidental is, there's a bit of credence to that because
because
it's a weird mistake to make.
Yeah, we read a lot of these state-backed news media's articles. So they seldom did this kind of mistakes. Because every word you can say, literally every word was get permission from their official the one upper level. So it's hard to make this kind of mistakes. That's why.
I wonder how heavily the news was pushed. As in, does the amount of airtime it received
Because it's
Is
in
it
the
relative with the crime,
CCTV.
for instance? Is it like a small
Oh,
story that seems to be blown out of proportion intentionally because of the name, I wonder?
yeah, because it's in the CCTV, so that is Chinese Central TV, and it's 9 in the morning. Then people were now, forward, and forward by like a global news, and then global news in English. Now you know why you guys, I mean the English speakers can read this news, because originally it was in Chinese. If they didn't translate it in English so quick, you won't have the news in the same day. No, so that's why it's very suspicious.
Okay, let's get into the top tech headlines today. Wall Street Journal reporting that they have sources that Elon Musk told potential investors in his Twitter deal he plans to stage an IPO of Twitter in as little as 3 years after taking it private. So that's a new additional detail. Number two, Samsung unveils Universal Flash Storage 4.0, claiming double the speed of 3.1, making it ideal for 5G phones, and sets mass production for Q3 2022. 5G smartphones are about to get a lot faster, is the summary of that Samsung 4.0 flash storage. Will offer twice the performance of 3.1. Next, from the Wall Street Journal, NFT sales fell 92% to a 19,000 daily average this week from a peak of 225,000 in September of 2021. Active wallets fell 88% to 14,000 from a November 2021 high.
Oh,
And
wow.
leading the Wall Street Journal to ask, is this the beginning of the end of NFTs? The NFT market is collapsing.
And I think there's only a few big players, so that's why when they stop playing, the percentage looks great.
As the market goes down and there's less money to throw around, I'm sure it will.
Next up from Vice, SafeGraph says it will stop selling the location data of visitors to Planned Parenthood and other family planning centers to stop any potential misuse. Oh, well, that's nice. Well, here, let me break out the fucking claps for you. Jesus Christ.
Why were they selling it in the first place?
Exactly. Holy shit.
Actually, the thing is here that you can buy data for anything. We had a thread about this when one of the back channels, exactly this news. The thing is that you can buy data for anything. Let's take these ones that actually that figure this out, that you could buy this information and made a news article. Let's categorize these guys and see how we can see that they go from work to their therapist, and from the therapist to the liquor store. Because that data is also available for $160 a month or week. You understand?
Okay, next up, a company called Moisel, which provides a mobile device management system for Apple devices, raises about 200 million. Twitter tests something called Twitter Circle, a feature for sharing tweets with up to a circle of 150 people that you select, rather than publicly, similar to Instagram's close friends sharing option. And I saw a video of it, and two friends of mine are early beta testers of it. They both seem to really like it. And I, as one of their friends who is in their circle, I still see their tweet, and it notifies me that I'm in their circle and I'm part of a limited group that got to see this tweet from this friend because they didn't share it publicly. They shared it to their circle, of which I now know I'm included.
So
So
my
that's
two thoughts to this is, one is
yeah.
obviously monetization. That sounds very, very monetizable to me. And second, how does this fit in with facets? Are they now out the window?
Well,
Because it
facets.
sounds
I see what you mean, because facets could be. It's your own facets of your personality, of your work
yeah.
persona, and your bike club persona and your poker playing persona and your, whatever your other personas are. And but the thing there is, different Twitter users would follow different parts of your personality. Like some people would be interested in your poker playing persona or your church going persona. Your church friends would follow your church persona, and your poker buddies would follow your poker persona. But it's up to them to follow the right persona. In this case, you dictate who it gets shared to. So you set up the group on your terms rather than them opting into your persona. So it's kind of the reciprocal in a way. The next is Reuters is reporting that Didi, which is the Uber of China, says it is cooperating with the SEC's investigation into its $4.4 billion U.S. IPO in June of 2021, subject to strict compliance with the Chinese laws. And the South China Morning Post version of this story says Didi Global reveals it faces SEC probe over their NYSE IPO. Right, because they did their IPO and then 48 hours later, China came and said, get the fuck out of here with that nonsense. We told you not to do this. And unless you and all of your employees and all of their family members want to spend some time in the Xinjiang province, you might want to take this thing off of the exchange. So they're now being investigated to find out what really went down there. I think we know what went down there. They went there so their investors could get their money out of China. But we will find out shortly. The next is from CNBC that AMD did their earnings report. Who cares? The next is that Uber did their earnings report, up 136% year over year, net loss of about $6 billion due to equity investments. Gross bookings are up 35%. Mobility revenues crossed delivery revenues. Okay, next is Lyft did their earnings report. Revenue of $875 million. Uber, by comparison, was $6.8 billion. So about a 10x on top, in terms of revenue, Uber over Lyft there. Anyway, stock down 25% on Lyft after the earnings report. After it gave a forecast for the current quarter that missed analysts' estimates and company plans. Okay, and a few more. Airbnb did their earnings report. Number of nights booked was up 59% year over year. Well, that's because they had such a very slow 2020 during COVID, I guess. Revenue up 70% year over year. A net loss of 19 million and down. Yeah, it's kind of hard to judge that one. Match Group did theirs. That's essentially Tinder and the other dating apps. Who cares about that? Any other really interesting ones? Here's one from Bloomberg. After cracking down on the technology giants, China is now leaning on them to fill grocery deliveries during lockdown. Okay, and Facebook's AI lab creates something called Open Pre-Trained Transformer, a language model trained with 175 billion parameters to match GPT-3's size, and gives it to researchers for free. And there you go. Those are your big, boring headlines for today. Now we go to the tweets. Before I go to the tweets, does anyone have a tech headline or tweet that they want to make sure that we cover?
Tyler, I'm not sure if you covered it earlier. The White House is going to announce that they're going to invest more into quantum.
Yeah, I saw that you shared. That's one of the ones I have coming up, but we can go ahead and it's a Reuters article that Annette shared. White House to boost support for quantum technology while boosting cybersecurity. The White House on Wednesday will announce a slate of measures to support quantum technology in the U.S. while laying out steps to boost cybersecurity to defend against the next generation of supercomputers. The U.S. and other nations are in a race to develop quantum technology, which could fuel advances in AI, material science, and chemistry. Quantum computers, a main focus of the effort, can operate 1 million times faster than today's advanced supercomputers. And then it goes in to explain the difference. Joe Biden will sign an executive order aimed at strengthening the National Quantum Initiative and Advisory Committee, the government's independent expert advisory body for quantum information science and technology, and is expected to name the members of the boards in coming weeks. Okay.
It's amazing how late we are. Do you think we're really that late, or they've been working on it and just now making an announcement?
It's late relative to China, but ahead of schedule for where America might normally have been historically.
Yeah, but I think relative to China is everything, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, we need to continue to improve this, but the fact that we're less tardy than normal is a cause for optimism, I think. VW, Pat shares this one from the Financial Times, that VW, Volkswagen, the world's second largest electric vehicle maker, has been hit by supply chain bottlenecks, and VW has sold out completely of electric cars in Europe and the United States. It's a mix of kind of demand and lack of supply, I guess. And then Armish.
Yes. Does it say anywhere in there how many they actually supplied?
Good question. Here, let's see.
Because if it's 150, then
it says here. I'm just opening the article. I just retweeted the article to the Tech News Twitter account, but now reading a bit of it, it says it's 100,000, 99,000. And by the way, Volkswagen includes other brands, including Porsche and Audi, and sold more than 99,000 electric vehicles worldwide in the first 3 months of 2022.
Well, that's actually good traction, but that bottleneck, I wonder if that's going to affect their outcomes for 2020.
It says VW is targeting a total of 700,000 EV sales for 2022 as a whole, as it attempts to catch up with Tesla. However, production has been hampered, particularly in VW's largest market of China, where it sold just 28,800 in the first quarter due to coronavirus.
Yeah.
Compared to the
I don't see them catching up.
Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, compared to the news that we got over the last couple of days about the potential for a second Shanghai gigafactory, and really pushing from Tesla, really pushing to get to a 1 million a year production in Asia. So far beyond VW's current numbers and their estimates for that area.
But I think Asia is the determinant for them, right? Because it's the easiest market to penetrate with EVs. If that struggles, your concerns globally are even larger still. So I don't think that they make their goal, and they should be retracting completely this year.
It's sales, isn't it? Potential sales. I think it's something like 30 million cars. So I may have to get fact checked, but 30 million a year in China, and no, 20 million a year in China, 5 million in the US, or something like that. It's good. It's more than double car sales a year. So obviously the market is much larger by sheer matter of fact of the 1.3 whatever billion people that live there.
So the article mentions briefly that it's a combination of the COVID lockdowns and the supply chain issues around semiconductors and things like that are hampering.
And battery components and things, so all the sort of minerals and things that go into all that, I think is worldwide on a shortage list anyway. So producing those huge numbers, whether for China or for the rest of the world, is still going to be a problem.
Sure. Kind of related, BB just found one from South China Morning Post that Tesla's second Shanghai plant will add 450,000 units of annual capacity. Tesla's new Shanghai plant near the existing Gigafactory will increase annual capacity to another 450,000 units per year, thanks to local authorities for their aid in helping to restart production at the plant. And now they're making a second plant. BB found also another one from South China Morning Post that Foxconn, one of the big assemblers of Apple products, suspends recruitment of new workers in Zhengzhou amid citywide lockdown from Wednesday till next Tuesday. So they're having their COVID lockdown there at the moment, which is one of the largest cities for iPhone assembly globally. You could see some severe iPhone delays.
And I think Apple anticipated that. They talked about that earlier in the quarter. So we're looking at another wave of shutdowns, which will impact distribution. I'm wondering how that shakes for semiconductors and some of the projections that we talked about last year.
Exactly. And because I don't follow these things all that closely, I was just wondering how, I believe that Taiwan is the most significant manufacturer of high quality, etc., semiconductors in the whole world and leads the market completely. And China's been trying to play catch up and also buying off companies around the world, including from here in the UK, to try and catch up on that semiconductor production, if anything, just for their own supply requirements. But the thing is, with the lockdown, with all the other things that's happening, I haven't noticed how those new semiconductor manufacturing companies have been going down in China. They seem to stall at one point, and a lot of new developments were closing down, not being able to produce semiconductor chips and stuff. So I wonder if anybody else has a better update, maybe BB or any of you China watchers. I just don't get the feeling that's going well. So, adding to the problems.
I speed up this and decoupling, and especially for the American companies, and actually Japan and the US are to deepen their cooperation in this. It said it's a 2 nanometer chips in the future. So actually, but it's very funny because originally it was the US tried to stop Japan to advance the chips. Then Taiwan has this OEM industries like 20 years or 30 years ago. But right now, since China, we don't know the threat from them, then at least now we can see to move like Foxconn, move all these factories to the India, to Vietnam, and the South Eastern Asia countries, and Intel, yeah, have this bill backed by the U.S. government, and even Apple have this plan in 5 years. We see China will try to, you can so-called cooperate with other countries' companies, or so-called to try to do more steal from the other country, tax from other countries as well. But right now, I think the problem is Xi Jinping tried to do this zero COVID policy so stubbornly. So right now, the economy goes so, it's damaged to another level. So we'll see some strategy changing in the coming months, but still, that's why we read the news that they lift some crackdowns on high tax. But still no in practical major yet. We maybe see some of them, and just like in the coming months. But still, because the GDP now, the prediction of the GDP in China this year is decreasing, so it's gonna be worse for the semiconductor companies or industries in China. But right now, or I would say the manufacturing supply chain still depending heavily in China's all these factories yet. But it's gonna happen quicker and quicker.
On a slight tangent, but related to this, I was looking into this a couple months ago, and from what I understand, the chip issue around the world isn't so much for the chips that we need for really high tech. It's for the chips for all the low tech stuff like washing machines and refrigerators, like that's been where the real shortage is. I don't know if somebody can make comment to that, but I understand that there is a difference in the shortages.
Yeah, George, I've got a close friend who works for BT to do with their supply chain, British Telecom. They have millions of like hubs and routers and stuff built every year. And he was saying exactly the same thing, that it's not the latest process stuff, the smallest, the 5-7 nanometer type stuff. It's the intermediate, slightly older stuff and the like. So yeah, I think that's right.
I think one point to note for the semiconductor industry is separated into front end and back end. So the front end, the technology differences, there's a big gap, of course, with those latest technology and those old technology. But for the back end process is pretty similar because they need to do, the packaging into this black thing that appears on whatever board that you're going to have on your whatever device, be it old or new technology. So I think a lot of those work are actually done in China. So
Yeah,
B,
sorry. Oh, I just want to say that then that's why the U.S. government forced the TSMC to build not the first advanced chips in the U.S. Yeah.
okay, here we go. In no particular order. May found one that about $1 billion rushed into the ape coin market in 1 hour as Musk added the NFT to his Twitter bio as the main photo. He put up a bored ape as his Twitter picture and causing 1 billion to flow into ApeCoin market cap in about an hour.
Jesus, people are stupid.
The next is that Joe Rogan says the government is freaking out, quote unquote, over Bitcoin's viability as a currency. As Bitcoin slowly recovers after a difficult week, more public personalities are coming out as strong supporters, including Joe Rogan, the headline says. And then Jeff G found one from the New York Times that Japan says it needs nuclear power. Can host towns ever trust it again? The Ukraine war has shown the fragility of Japan's energy supplies, but the decision to restart plants after a Fukushima disaster is fraught with emotions. And the next one, let me retweet that one to the Tech News Twitter account. Thank you, Jeff. The next is from Messi from TechCrunch that Meta, previously known as Facebook, faces years of tougher antitrust oversight in Germany. Facebook's rebranded parent Meta has become the new tech giant to be confirmed as subject to a special competition abuse control regime in Germany. The next is from Bibi that China's doomed fight against demographic decline. Beijing's efforts to boost fertility are making the problem worse, is the headline. Well, let's look at that one. That's an important one because the rest of the world has the same problem. We're just not as proactive about dealing with it as China has been. It says China is aging fast. China's rapidly aging society and plunging birth rate poses a host of challenges for its leaders, including a shrinking number of young workers and an increasingly unstable pension system. Beijing is steadily pivoting toward pronatalism as a strategy to mitigate these risks. Yes, we've seen a whole lot of that since the beginnings of ending education as a for-profit industry, among others. And this article goes on to say that Beijing should change course, halt its ideological pivot against women, accept China's grayer future, and address the consequences of aging by raising retirement ages. And that's one way to keep enough workers in the factories, cutting unsustainable pension promises, and devising better care systems for the elderly, particularly those among China's poor rural populations. If China fails to take these steps now, it is likely to both worsen its own demographic future and render the eventually necessary policy shifts sharper and far more painful. The baby boom goes bust, it says. And it's a rather long article, which ends with the following points. That Beijing should halt its ideological pivot against women. It says Beijing cannot simply kick the can down the road, vainly hoping that pro-natalist initiatives will absolve authorities of the need to address such issues. Doing so will just make the eventual policy shift sharper. Okay, the person's repeating themselves. But yeah, the word is getting out that it's not just China. The whole Western, quote unquote, developed world is going through the same thing rather strongly. And China, as usual, is just the first to kind of address it head on because it understands how serious of a threat it is. The next is from Jeff G. from CNN that a startup is creating human milk in a lab. Breast milk is the perfect food for babies. The possible second best, according to this startup, is human milk. So why aren't we drinking human milk grown in a lab? Lab-grown human milk. It's probably the healthiest thing you can drink. You drink it as a baby.
Slightly skeptical that it would be as good as the genuine article, not because of the nutrients, because of things like antibodies and some of the other more biological factors. So I don't know if a more medical person wants to jump in, but I'm slightly skeptical.
Okay, Poppy found this one from BBC, that Elon Musk says that Twitter may see slight cost increases for businesses and governments, but that the platform will always be free for casual users. So might as well.
Governments?
Yes.
What are they paying for?
Well, they should in a way, because they constantly have demands on Twitter to remove this and tailor what content is visible to the people in those countries. So why not charge them for that, essentially?
So that's their customer base that they have to satisfy?
It makes sense. It's like, hey, if you're going to have all these demands on us to operate in your country, how about a handling fee, a processing fee? You're sending 100,000 requests a year. How about we add, $10 per request, and then when we send you an invoice,
Censorship as a service?
Censorship as a service. Well, you nailed it, Chris. There it is.
The verification badge is very, I would say, that should be an important thing. I mean, a valuable thing, because the verification from the official proves that your reputation or credibility. So I mean that is of some economic value, because it's like if normal people like to apply for that, it's hard to get that. So maybe that's a price.
Okay.
I wonder if every other business model can do that. I mean, like with my startup, the U.S. government is requiring me to verify and do anti-money laundering (KYC) on my platform. So it would be great if I can charge the SEC for asking me to do that, right? I mean, isn't that the equivalent of what he's trying to do? I mean, every business that has a business model of doing something, if it doesn't comply with the government or requirements of things, you comply. Otherwise, they shut you down in some parts of the world, or your business model doesn't function. So if I don't do this, they wouldn't allow me to do that. So can I charge them? That would be nice. That would be super nice.
Okay. Instagram is testing a TikTok-like full screen feed, no doubt. That's what Zuckerberg does best, and copy whoever's beating him at the time. So the next one that I have is from Thomas Tong, and it has a very clever title of Taste of the Future. Robot chefs learn to taste as it works or as it goes. A robot chef has been trained to taste food at different stages of the chewing process to assess whether it's sufficiently seasoned. And the next is also from Thomas Tong. New open source software automates RNA analysis to speed up research and drug development. Scientists at Scripps Research have unveiled a new software tool for studying RNA, ribonucleic acid molecules, which have a host of critical roles in drug development. And now Scripps has figured out a way to automate RNA analysis to speed up the research of drug development. And for those who don't know, Scripps is in La Jolla, California, across the street from my alma mater, UCSD, which happens to be on right off of Torrey Pines, where you have one of the world's largest gatherings of drug research companies. So you have Scripps there right next to many of these leading drug research companies who will all benefit from this new open source software, which automates RNA analysis. The next one, also from Thomas Tong. Green walls in offices have a positive impact on skin microbiota and also enhance immune regulation. An experimental study led by the Natural Resource Institution of Finland showed that air circulating green walls installed inside of offices has positive impacts on skin microbiota and enhance the immune regulation.
Finland loves having green stuff.
Yeah, well, I think humans like being around plants. It's probably why you start craving to go on vacation if you work in a rather dull, plantless office. The next one is, where did it go? Oh, we covered the Alibaba stock drop because someone named Ma was arrested. India considers restricting...
What? Wait a minute, Tyler. Ma is arrested?
Someone named Ma, which Chinese people thought was Jack Ma, was arrested.
Okay.
So the stock
because he's from the same place with Jack Ma, and he works in tech, and use Ma somebody. So everybody suspects it's Jack Ma.
Oh, good. I'm glad I asked because I immediately assumed that Tyler was talking about Jack Ma being arrested. That's why. Okay, thanks.
He's currently on a finger painting tour.
But doesn't it, this is Robert, doesn't it make us also wonder that we in the West need to learn a little bit more about culture and the names and everything like that before we go off the handle, especially the stock market and things like that, because there are common names out there in different countries that have overlap.
How about also how misinformation gets transmitted quickly, right? I mean, no one verifies anything before actually they share it with someone. Really? I mean, I was so surprised. That's why I actually stopped Tyler and I asked him because I was surprised Jack Ma was arrested, just even for a second. So, like, whoever shared it, I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing it, but whoever shared it, I think it is surprising to me how quickly we are sharing misinformation if it's causing this type of share dropping. That to me is the bigger question of how ready we are as a population. We go, even including the media, faster is becoming, the mantra, compromising, better, instead of better, faster is becoming the motto, I guess.
So there's a gentleman who was responsible for translating the China social credit to the West and saying, "Hey, this is going to be a thing they're building." And what's hilarious about it was that when we talked to him about it, he was saying, I was asking, like, how did you get the scoop? Like, some inside party connections or something. He's like, I read the front page of the government website and then translated it. And I'm like, yeah, but well, why did you get that? He's like, because no one does that. Because he says that the only people that cover Chinese Chinese media translations is literally just business journals. He says there things happening in media, tech, law. He says tech is more recent because that one's becoming an actual competitive thing and crossing over into business. But he's like, there are very basic policy documents that just don't get translated outside a handful of academics. And so he says one of the few things I did was I was just looking at the social implications. And I'm like, so this doesn't bode very well for cross-cultural stuff. He's like, well, as long as it involves business, we've got that covered. If it's any of the other factors, we have a very, very small number of academics that actually do this stuff, and we're frankly put not really well compensated for this. I do this because I care about doing a cultural bridge, but that's different. And that was like 10, 12 years ago, but I don't think the situation has improved a whole lot since then, honestly.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, next up.
Before we move on, I just want to say that you can connect the disinformation and high frequency trading and algorithmic trading and the asymmetry of language here to say did it not just look suspicious? Is this clickbait or is this financial penetration testing to see what happens when all these aggregators send disinformation down the chain? And I remember being a stockbroker, financial planner at home, buying my first condo in when it was at 2010 when they still had when the flash crash occurred, and I was away from my desk that one ironic moment that markets went crazy and they put circuit breakers in. So thankfully there were circuit breakers, or maybe they knew to put circuit breakers in so that money can be another test of the metaverse.
The other thing one hears is a phrase I heard at one board where it's.
I'm going to go ahead and mute Valerie. So the next is from Armish, that Finland has terminated a contract with Russia's Rosatom to construct a third nuclear power plant. The deal was worth just about $8 billion.
Woo!
That's not a surprise if you saw the other headlines we read at the start of the program, where Russia flew a helicopter into Finland's airspace. Finland is moving tanks to its borders, and they're
looking to get a little land back.
And Finland and Sweden's NATO application could be wrapped up as soon as 2 weeks.
Oh my!
Yeah, and also one of the Finland, I think, I don't know, foreign ministry or something like that. She was talking yesterday that she said that even if something happened, just because they are part of the EU bloc, she said even though they weren't with NATO, she really does expect that there will be support from the EU as well as NATO and other things. That's how much they are getting nervous, in a sense. She's saying that, before they become fully NATO member, where they can have that Article 5, she said if anything happens to Finland, we have, I think, a long border with Russia, and they are really nervous. So that's crazy.
We successfully held off a world war for, 60, 70 years? Something like that? Did our quality of diplomats just decay or something in the last 10, 20 years? Like, what went wrong there?
Okay. Next is from Armish, again, that the Prime Minister of Finland said there's no going back regarding the plan to join NATO. Quote, "We see now more clearly where Russia wants to take us. It is a world of spheres of influence where the stronger has the last word." From the New York Times. So no going back. We're joining NATO. Your move, Mr. Putin. And
that's one more border country with NATO stuff. Moscow gets very nervous about not having buffer states with things. Incidentally, randomly, I was just reading through the history of Ukraine things. Apparently, when they were forming the United Nations, Russia wanted an extra vote, so that was one of the factors. It's not the only factor. They were honestly more interested in other things, but one of the things that they were saying, oh yeah, Ukraine, it's a thing. It's totally autonomous, totally different region. They'd spent that a lot during when they're taking control of the territory to say, yes, you guys are completely independent from us. So literally, there's almost 100 years of Russia saying, Ukraine, you're independent, you're independent. So it's only relatively recently they've gone the other way and said, well, hang on a second. This isn't by the way, this is a very like misinformed kind of opinion. This is me just spending like 2 hours on Wikipedia, but it's really interesting reading the history with modern context with when they were forming around the United Nations, because the rhetoric has gone so much in the other direction.
Okay. Other interesting articles today. BB found this one from CNN that the EU proposes ban on Russian oil imports. The European Union is proposing to ban all oil imports from Russia by the end of the year and remove the country's biggest bank from the SWIFT international payment network.
There goes their economy.
Is it
The,
possible? That's my question.
the BB
Um,
found,
Yeah, is that possible? Yeah, that's a good question. And the other one is also if Putin feels like he's cornered, the way he did it for those two countries, I think Bulgaria and something, would he cut
oh,
it off right now? He's like, why wait for a year so that you can accomplish whatever plan you're having and then just spite them? I guess, you cut your nose to spite you, whatever, your face or something. Yeah, would he retaliate and just cut off everybody now? What would they do?
$1 billion a day.
And then, yes, because yesterday I read this Japan, this Mitsui corporation, they decided to continue their cooperation with the Russia uh, natural gas company. So just like this sanction things around the world, if there are some countries won't follow it, yeah, there are so many loopholes for Russia.
The reality is, if Russia cut them off now, it would actually cripple the rest of the world. It would cripple Russia as well. But as far as the prices in gas and oil, the world would deep dive into a recession.
Right.
That assumes that other countries don't increase production. OPEC artificially limits supply to keep prices high at a certain level. Ostensibly, essentially, if Russia cut things off, then other suppliers could just boost their production to make up the difference. It will harm
Yeah, but you
they'll harm
can't
their
just,
relationship
I
with
mean, if you
Russia.
work in oil and gas, you can't just boost your production immediately. It takes months in order to prep for that. And I'm not sure that the world is prepped for that. That's why they say in a year they'll be off of it, because you need your preparation. You don't just turn it on.
Yeah, it depends on capacity, a lot of things, exactly. And the other thing is, let's be clear, there's a number of oil producing countries that are benefiting from this. And if he does this next phase, who knows where the prices go also.
This would also assume that other groups weren't preparing for this as a thing. I mean, that's one of those. If you have basic logistics, you can prepare for these sorts of things. It's just whether or not they have or not. That's the open question.
Yeah, they are. I work closely in chemical manufacturing. One of my clients is works closely with oil and gas, and it's happening. The production is happening. People are ramping up. Companies are ramping up. It's just not there yet.
Yeah, I think they have been reporting that already. They have already asked, I think, 4 African countries like Nigeria, Angola, Egypt, or Algeria, that to be suppliers to the EU. But we have said it in this room before. Nigeria has been suffering with that commodity price fluctuation. The economy was struggling, and I think they were making a huge concerted effort to diversify their economy. And it is a little bit, concerning if they don't do it well structured, kind of ramping up and just fully becoming independent because somebody said, "Hey, we're gonna buy you big time," or even creating the corruption. That it's well known how corrupt the Nigeria system was, not the public benefiting from the oil, windfalls. So I wonder how that's gonna go. But yeah, the EU has been here in Africa already. What's his name? The State Department guy, Blinken.
Lincoln.
He was in Egypt. Yeah, he was in Egypt, I think, a couple of weeks ago, trying to ramp up all these things. So there is already in the works, like Anita said, that yeah, most African countries who are producing oil are ramping up already. So we'll see.
Okay. Next up is from BB. from Gizmodo that Twitter introduces circles for tweets that you don't want everyone to see. You make your own inner circle. We've covered that
Google
already.
got mocked endlessly for this, but I guess when Twitter does it, it's cool.
Yeah, for those who don't remember, Google's
Way back when.
social network was called Circles, run by a friend of mine, Dimitri Shapiro, who is from lives in my hometown, next to my mom, actually. But also, we lived together in Santa Monica for a bit. He did VO, which was a YouTube competitor, even before YouTube, and was sued out of existence by Universal Music Group for back in those early days of the YouTube competitors for having quote unquote unlicensed material. And so he got sued out of existence, and YouTube saw the writing on the wall and decided to sell to Google, which was probably a smart move at the time because they didn't have the financial resources to hire the big lawyers necessary to fight off what Hollywood had in mind for the YouTube competitors back then. Anyway, so Dimitri went over to Google and to run their social media platform that they called Circles. And there was a big launch around 2008. And the whole concept was to get you to to onboard by tagging all of your friends into different circles. So you had your poker playing circle, and you would drag your friends literally you would make the circle, you would call the name of the circle, whatever you want to call it, and then you would drag your friends into it. So you are essentially labeling all of your friends for Google. And I was told years later that Google thought that, coincidentally, this was around the same time that Google realized they needed to know who was an authority on any given topic. So rather than how Google used to work pre-2008 or 9, based on pages and ranking of pages, and that the pages and the ranking of those pages, that's why Google internally call it PageRank, that was the heart of the Google algorithm, where you would do a search, it would rank the pages, and you would see the top 10. Actually, they would show you a million pages, but the top 10 are on the front page, to 11 through 20 on the second page. You know how Google works. And that the pages were primarily ranked based on how many other pages linked to the ones that had the most inbound links from other pages got ranked very high. Well, the problem is fundamentally that companies like the one I was involved in started making tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of pages under one website, and started ranking very, very well because all of the pages link to each other, much like Wikipedia does. And so that would give a website with a million pages the ability to inbound link to itself endlessly and rank number one for everything. And the problem, Google didn't anticipate that people would come up with such a strategy to defeat their whole page ranking system, because they assumed everybody would be working on websites that had less than 50 pages. So Google rather realized they needed to fundamentally change their algorithm from inbound links and ranking of pages into ranking of people and authorship or authorship and authority, so that if Tiger Woods wrote an article about golf, it should outrank Cheryl's article about golf, even if Cheryl wrote it on sportsillustrated.com and Tiger Woods wrote it on, nobodieswebsite.com. So it shouldn't be the website that's ranked or the page that's ranked. It should be the author that's heavily weighted in the ranking. And that's why they needed to know who are the experts on every possible topic you can imagine. Hence, this clever strategy to launch a kind of fake social network, which the first step was to get everybody to rank all of their friends into different categories. And then they could see that Tyler is consistently put in the genius category of, whatever, and everybody's put into their own categories. And then Google knows who's good at what. And then the Gmail team said, you know what, we think we can do this in the background without needing to build a social network to trick people into doing this sorting for them. So anyway, that's an interesting recap of Google Circles, which people thought was going to be their Facebook competitor, but internally the teams weren't actually that interested in competing with Facebook after they got what they needed, which was figuring out how everyone's connected to each other and the buckets, how they organize each other.
Hey, are you
Google
sure
has
you're
a
not
long
going to check
tradition of
my
changing.
Are you sure you're not going to check my golf balls article? Check your back channel now.
Yeah.
Google has a long tradition of embracing product strategies and then changing halfway through, and they're like, "Wait a second, we just changed our mind on this." There's a website called Killed by Google that has a graveyard of many hundreds of projects for each one of them that was announced with much fanfare of going to change the world, etc. And then when it died, it's quite amazing with things. It's like the tombstones go on for a long way with things.
Google Wave, yeah. The next one is from BB that Facebook plans to release a laptop for the face and 3 more VR headsets by 2024. Updated versions
That
of
is,
Quest will
laptop for
follow.
the face is a terrible marketing message, by the way.
Yeah, I don't know what it means.
Quest, an $800 remote work device. Laptop for your face. You could hang out in Starbucks all day with that thing, with that laptop on your face. That would be fun. Just pour the drink in my mouth, uh, maybe a straw, maybe a perma straw, or I could just keep the drink on the desk, put the straw in my mouth, and have an invisible keyboard on the tabletop.
Maybe they should buy the patent about the Japan that uh, leaks leak screen, right? You can leak the screen and have all sorts of taste.
But at that point, maybe WeWork will be in big trouble because it won't really matter where you're actually working, as long as it has a decent connection.
And just so long as you're giving your data to Zuckerberg, that's the real quest for whether or not you're allowed to work in the future. Your workplace arrangements.
So the next is from
Imagine just on very briefly. Imagine essentially all the kids that are doing Chromebooks in school because they're forced to, because they're required to, which puts all their account data in a single account, which technically isn't combined with the rest of Google's services, etc., but still gathered, it's still permanently logged, etc. And at some point in the future, when they legally turn over a certain age, if they happen to click the wrong bright blue button that says "I consent to merge all this data to the rest of my public profile," Google is going to now have a complete from early it's 6 7 years old, etc., all the way up through essentially like 18 years old. Imagine a similar version for all the people doing work data, and now they've got detailed psychographics for everything. It's not just going to be like the social part of I'm doing at home. It's going to be essentially a workplace persona as well. This is just one more brick on the how can you completely dominate essentially the dopamine feedback centers.
Okay, next up is from Ted Abramson that the U.S. Department of Energy announces a $3 billion going towards EV battery manufacturing. They announced today a new $3 billion program going to battery manufacturing and supply chain.
This might go literally just because Mexico just nationalized their lithium mines last month. So might be a kind of a pseudo response to that. A lot of countries worldwide are considering putting in nationalist measures, either subsidies, nationalizing the supply chain, etc. Literally redeploying militaries around this because electric vehicles are they're the hot thing. So there's a lot of movements happening in the lithium markets right now.
India now has 100 startups valued at over $1 billion. That's otherwise known as a unicorn. So now they're over 100 unicorns. So I imagine they're now probably the third country on the planet to do that. US, China, India. They're the only three. And next we have then there's no going back. We covered that one. India considers restricting wheat exports as heat destroys crops. The fall in production is raising concerns for the domestic market within India, with millions depending on farming as their main livelihood and food source, and it's too hot on the farms. The country experienced its hottest March on record, shriveling India's wheat crop during a crucial growth period. So India's considering restricting wheat exports because they need it. They need to keep it domestic. That's a problem.
That's
This is where heat is turning into water scarcity and food scarcity
It's
in a
turning
country.
into a difference in where crops are grown.
Yes.
yeah, but the crops aren't being planted in those areas now. Look at Ukraine.
Right. But just look at this essentially longer term. Russia has a giant Siberian tundra that is more or less not useless, but it's very low population density, etc. Imagine what happens when the world warms up a little bit and that now becomes planting area. For them, a lot of things that happen with climate change don't necessarily work out badly in their specific favor. There's a lot of places where that has a thing where it's not that wheat becomes impossible to grow; it's that the places that you grow it move, and that's part of where a lot of environmentalists freak out is because if that moves into areas that are currently biodiverse, and then you end up wrecking the whole thing and making it just a monoculture. That's essentially what happens in a lot of areas that are wrecking their rainforest for beef production, as an example.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and it makes a ton of sense. But if you're looking in the short term for the next year or 2 years with what's happened in the Ukraine with them not planting at all, and now India is going to minimize their export, it's going to cause a huge catastrophe in the next 6 to 9 months.
So
Yeah, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Ukraine say also they have a ton of wheat, but they couldn't find a way to export it? Maybe there is that logistics problem, but there is a lot of wheat in the country that wasn't shipped out, or as usually they export it to a ton of countries in the world. Or maybe I just heard it wrong.
I did not see that or hear it, but maybe someone else.
Yeah, I thought I heard that on TV when they were reporting that. And I was wondering if the world wasn't finding out, a way to be able to just at least get that type of wheat out of the country. At least, for some countries they desperately need it. But I think I heard one of the Ukraine ministers saying that they have wheat, but they just don't have a means to get it out of where it is in warehouses in different parts of their country, as well as in their port. I thought that's what I heard, but I could be wrong.
okay, next is Ted Abramson shares this one. It says Tesla says it will turn Shanghai into the world's largest vehicle export hub with its new factory. Tesla says that the new factory capable of producing 450,000 vehicles per year will turn Shanghai into the largest exporter of EVs. And Estella found this one from Vice, that scientists discover method to break down plastic in days, not centuries. A group of scientists at the University of Texas at Austin have created a modified enzyme that can break down plastics that would otherwise take centuries to degrade in a matter of days. There we go. That was worth it. There we go. Kudos to UT Austin and whoever that is. That's the kind of headline we need to see more of. Less of the dog walking apps and 50,000th video game. We need people, smart brains on planet Earth, focusing on exactly problems like that. And
That's
so,
fantastic. Tyler, in the article, do they mention any study on what it does to um, animal life?
no, I haven't read the article. I just retweeted it to the Tech News Twitter account. So you can read that one at TNATW. So thank you to Estella for finding that awesome article. The next one is, oh, that's a duplicate. The next one's from Katerina. from CNBC that coal-fired power generation is on track to hit all-time highs this year. Coal-fired power generation due to hit all-time, according to the report from the International Energy Agency. How is it possible that we are going to have more coal-fired power generation than ever before, when we know that we're hitting ourselves in the head with a ball-peen hammer? Why on earth aren't we at least slowing down the damage? Why are we increasing the rate with which we are hitting ourselves in the head with the hammer?
We're addicted to energy, and it needs to be made in real time. You can't start up a new solar plant until you have solar panels, and it's not even a solar plant, and you need battery storage. So, my dad built power plants. He went from coal-fired stuff in the U.S. to then exporting it via building a plant in Vietnam. But we switched to natural gas because it's more efficient to do a more expensive plant that's combined cycle that takes the waste heat from one and recycles it to make more power. But coal is dirty, it's quick, it's cheap, and you can rail deliver it almost anywhere. And by the way, it uses international shipping lanes. It doesn't need to be cooled off to be transported at the densities that natural gas and LNG does. That's your answer. And we didn't do a carbon tax. We haven't priced for the future. Sadly, those are answers, but they're not good ones.
And sadly, there are many, many solutions that are already available that we can actually do away with new developments in coal, digging out coal deposits, new developments in oil drillings and so on. We really don't need to do all of those new developments, which will take years to actually come into fruition and produce anything. And in the meantime, use the renewables that we have got. But this is we've gone over this many times, and I'm starting to lose the will to live in how the new developments are being agreed to and promised by our governments, whether here in the UK or in India or in the United States, with really no thought as to how it's going to reflect on our lives right now, this minute. The fact that oil prices, petrol prices, energy prices are so much higher, inflation, the war, all those things, nothing impacts us right now, this minute. We're thinking about years down the road. In the meantime, we're emitting all those extra carbon emissions and so on, and nothing has happened. It's like digging a deeper hole for ourselves. So there's stuff out there, people. We need to be aware and listen when we're given the information, or go and find out some more. Ugh.
Okay.
Sorry.
Russia just threatened to destroy Ireland and Britain with a nuclear tsunami, is the headline from Forbes. Thank you to Katerina from this one. It says, if the British continue to send weapons to Ukraine, then Britain and Ireland face destruction by nuclear tsunami. That's the unmistakable message from Russian media, which recently ran 2 animated videos depicting nuclear strikes on the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. Which I'm sure Ireland's thinking, WTF, leave us out
Yeah,
of it.
that's ghastly scary. That they can't afford that, honestly. Yeah, and we're in no position as allies to help them should that happen. By the way, BTW, they're screwed.
The videos, which ran on state-owned television channel Russia 1, were narrated by Dmitry Kiselyov, a television presenter known as Putin's mouthpiece. The first video shows a submarine launching a Poseidon, Russia's notorious thermonuclear-armed torpedo designed to create a giant radioactive tsunami that destroys enemy coastal cities. Quote, the explosion of this thermonuclear torpedo by Britain's coastline will create a giant tsunami wave up to 500 meters high. Get the fuck out of here. Hold on. Chris? Did Chris jump out already? Can somebody ping Chris
Yeah.
back? This is right up his alley.
Okay.
Hey, Tyler, regardless of whether that's accurate or not, I think we are much closer to a really bad situation in terms of through whatever nuclear war or whatever than people realize. I mean that the Russians are boxed in; they will not give up. Okay, and and this is all over. Basically, that Zelensky was now willing, and now he's willing, okay, to have his deal that he would end the war would be to, promise not to join NATO, which is if he had done that before a shot was fired, okay, and we wouldn't have this situation in the world. I mean, this idea that we could just keep pushing Russia, this whole thing that you've even talked about, that it was like some sort of maybe deliberate plan. I mean, I told you at the time I thought it was insanity. I still think it's insanity. I mean, I think the world is much closer to, quite frankly, probably Armageddon than people realize. I'm surprised it's not more reflected in the market. I mean, I'm like very concerned about it.
I
What do
think
you
you have a
think
right.
Ukraine should do? What do you think Ukraine should have done? I mean, somebody
What
just
Ukraine should have done before a shot was fired, that's different from what they should do now. Before a
Well,
shot was fired, what they should have done is said, what we want to do is basically acknowledge what was called the Budapest Agreement, where they signed it, and then Russia signed it, even though it was Yeltsin. The United States signed it, Clinton, Britain signed it, France, and basically it didn't say anything about NATO, but it promised that everybody was going to be neutral in Ukraine. Now specifically, someone's going to sit there and say, specifically, it doesn't say that Ukraine won't join NATO. It just makes it and puts an obligation on Russia and the other countries to respect Ukraine's neutrality. So it wasn't like a two-way thing. They could have just very easily adapted that and said, we're going to be neutral, because and I know this comes out as sounding pro Putin, and it's not. I'm not pro Putin. It's a terrible guy what he's done, but given particularly the war crimes. But you need to ask, and the guy who wrote the book on the Cuban Missile, the seminal piece on the book on the Cuban Missile Crisis, Essence of Decision, Graham Allison from Harvard. I was on a thing with him several weeks ago, and he said the same thing. This is like the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, we have the NATO has weapons in Poland. Okay, that we would never accept if they were on the United States border. Okay, and so I mean it's very similar to the issues that we had back then. I mean they
but
had put
Ken,
this. Yeah.
so I'm sorry, Ken. I really do hear what you're saying, and I do understand. Well, I try my best anyway. I'm probably 90% understanding of those arguments that were already presented to all the various rooms and Clubhouse weeks and weeks ago. But if we just go back to what Tyler was reporting regarding the tsunami, the threat, it's the same sort of bully boy threats that Russia and other authoritarian countries like that love to push out into the wide world. Now, let's just take it the threats. Are we going to stand up to them as bullies or not? Suppose there was whatever it is that came out and created the tsunami. Do you think really it'll be just the UK that would be affected? 500-meter high tsunami. Uh, Holland would be well underwater. Denmark, a lot of other countries, Britain is an entity, yes, but there's water all around us, and the tsunami will continue to have impact over a large
And
part of
Britain
the rest of
has
Europe.
nukes, and that's why I'm not so sure that that's a
Well,
real credible threat. But however, the Russians are just not their history. They will not just give up. Okay. So, and I don't know. I cannot figure out at this juncture, okay, what an acceptable peace deal would be. Okay. I don't think you should probably, I don't know. I mean, do you let them take part of Eastern Ukraine? The Ukrainians don't want to give it up. And then how do you walk away from all the human rights abuses and bombing maternity
exactly.
clinics and everything else he's done?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
but here's the thing. Joe Biden and Boris Johnson and everybody else in the West, they're not preparing. They're not admitting to their populations that we might have a much worse war and a much
That's
higher
right.
loss of life, because
So
at some point the Russians are not, they're not bluffing. By the way, the guy who
That's
runs that
right.
Ukraine room, was in this room, okay, before the war, saying, "Oh, I don't think Putin's really good. They're not really going to attack." And I'm thinking, wait a second, they're they just created a medical tent with blood supplies right on the border. What do you think they did that for? Putin was serious. He had a red line. His red line was he wanted a commitment. They wouldn't join NATO. They couldn't get they didn't give him what he wanted, and now we have a war.
Hey,
The
Okay,
let's
saddest part of
go
all of
back
this
just to
is,
the article. Then I think part of that really was to scare and divide um, the UK and Ireland because there's already divisions when it comes with Brexit and handling Northern Ireland. So yes, I'm sure there is a military component to this, but it's about dividing and creating fear, as everyone's talking about in the UK when they make that kind of statement.
and by the way, this was predicted. This whole issue that we're where we are today in the world was predicted by many people, even 20 something years ago. Bill Clinton was advised by a very large bipartisan group of people, 200 foreign policy experts on both sides of the aisle, signed a letter to him not to allow Poland to go into NATO because the Russians would view it as provocative, because the German army had marched through Poland in World War One and World War Two. They had a lot of casualties in Russia. Okay, and at some point, why can't the West think about, particularly the United States, if the shoe was on the other foot, how would we react? Because that was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Why were there missiles in Cuba? Because NATO had missiles in Turkey aimed at the Soviet Union. And so, what was the deal that ended it? They took their missiles out. NATO took its missiles out. I mean, they want a perimeter, you know, of not having hostile states right on top of them. Okay, just like we do in the United States. I mean, I
yeah,
don't
But
know
but
why that's so
reactions,
hard to understand.
yeah,
But
but
Ken,
reactions
think
to,
about what you are saying. Um, Forget about the US and others. Yes, there is always geopolitics, but if a country want to be independent and want to decide what to do with their life, who are we to tell them? I mean, there are many countries they split. Eritrea is split from Ethiopia in 93. They say we just don't want to be part of Ethiopia, and Ethiopia cannot force Eritrea to stay there. There was 30 years of war between the guerrilla fighters who wanted to split from Ethiopia. But at the end of the day, after 30 years, after three different governments, they finally said, okay, we're going to let them vote. And they voted and they split. And now Ethiopia can't go back after like 15 years and say, you know what, you can't have a government that's not sympathetic to me, so I'm going to invade you. Or say, you know what, you can't have this, so I'm going to force you to come back. If that's the case, we are going back to what the Kenyan diplomats said in the vote at the UN Security. Africa accepted many of awful demarcation that was done by the colonizers just because that was the way to survive without killing each other.
Yeah,
If
but
you
I
look
don't
at
think.
Ethiopia went to war with Somalia because Somalia said part of Ethiopia was part of
But these are
Somalia.
nuclear
You
powers, Messy. What makes
yeah,
it
it
I'm
different.
hearing
doesn't matter
conflated
now.
issues here.
It doesn't matter. If people have a will to split, you can't just
But no,
And
no
it
one's
did
decide.
asking you
happen.
to
But
And
split.
but
and
we're
the
Listen,
last
all
thing,
reducing.
Ukraine,
and
all Ukraine had to do was agree to be Switzerland. Okay, that was
exactly,
basically
exactly.
it. That's
Right.
all
Yeah,
they
but
had
So
to
why
do.
All they
why
had to say
change?
was that they weren't going to put weapons on their
Exactly.
borders. And it
that's
didn't
right.
happen. And Ken is absolutely right. This is equivalent to what happened with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And if we look at the way
Yes.
the United States handled that, it is the same. And I am not saying what Putin is doing is right. It's not. But if we understood it from his perspective, perhaps the world wouldn't be in this situation right now, because this is not just Russia and
Correct.
Ukraine. This is the world that
Can I just say
we.
that has there ever been a war, an act of violence, an act of aggression that actually has produced a good outcome for both sides? has any such action actually ever proved to be a positive,
Not the action.
progressive?
I don't
Not
think
the
that's
action. But
the
look,
question. I think the question is, are you vilifying them without taking full content, right? I agree with Ken. Walking it backwards to say, yeah, there are some humanistic things that are occurring, it's valid. Yes, that's true. But it doesn't negate the fact that you cannot threaten a person's home without expecting a response from them. And what Ken is saying is that Ukraine could have mitigated this entire thing by saying, I'm not going to threaten your home. I will play the neutrality role. I will not allow NATO any access to you by virtue of this open access. This is all they needed to do, and it did not happen. It's not to say that it justifies the war, but you cannot threaten a person's home and expect them to sit idly. So understanding the root cause of it not only negates this in the future, but it can potentially provide a solution now. If you want to stop Putin, allow him to feel safe. How does that occur? Having a conversation with Ukraine that allows them to create that neutrality while still protecting themselves border-wise and economic-wise.
Okay, this is
And I
Hey, this is
think,
Irvin down
even
at the
I think
bottom.
all the things you said might be, but we don't know, because I think what also he was upset about is the pro-Russia leader was overthrown. They don't want him, so they elected some other government, and he wasn't happy with that government. He wants, like, Belarus pro-Russia leaders around him. And those pro-Russia leaders may not be the good people, the good leaders for Ukrainians. So Ukrainians should have the right to elect their own leader. So here, really, Putin was really pissed when they actually got rid of the pro-Russia leader and elected Poroshenko, and they were beside themselves. So it doesn't really matter at the end of the day how much they say. You can bend over and walk on eggshell and always try to go and appease, make them happy over and over. And at some point, when you even elected leaders that you would like to have for running your country, and they are unhappy, well, I mean, how far are they going to do?
but
And they don't
but that
think.
election itself
can I,
was not the cause of this war. It was their
can
refusal to pledge neutrality and not to join NATO. Period. A single sentence. That was
can
it.
I tr- Oh, sorry. This is Miriam. Thank you so much. I'm first time talking on the stage, and I've been watching this up close as one of the moderators of the Step Room, and actually we discussed this article when it was published, I think 2 days ago, in depth and looking at it from multiple perspectives. And one of the perspectives is definitely what Valerie was saying, is that that basically they are trying to terrorize world and split and conquer within the different countries. And one of the almost the jokes that we said in the room was that basically it was 2 days after British newspapers, magazines wrote derogative, in a certain way, article. I mean, it's not really derogative if you are a normal person, but if you have a enlarged ego, it might be about surgery that Putin's supposed to come have. And you have to understand, in the playbook of a strong man, it was like, very offensive to say that he is sick with this that illness. It's a very threatening picture for the certain structures that are built in Russia with the very strong men. And when this person disappears for 2-3 days for surgery, that can really change a lot of things. And that articles where there were multiple articles like that, and basically there were multiple analysts were saying that Russia got offended, and that was the response, and basically you just scare people and have talking points, and also my observation, and I'm from Poland. I grew up in Poland. I observed my mother, means actually me as a child, was involved in Solidarity and the anti-communist movement. There are certain things that how you read what comes out of the government, and it's kind of reading between the lines and seeing where they're heading, what the effect on people they want to have. And that's, to just kind of separate three layers: the reality that of the article, and the reality they want to create in people's minds. And then you're in control of the messaging, at least way as a receiver. So you know what they want to, what they want to accomplish in my mind. What they want to accomplish in my mind is fear, and what they want to accomplish in my mind is, oh, they are very strong and mighty, when they are actually losing. And this is the biggest cover up that they're trying to do. What they're trying to do is basically the fact that they are losing, and they're losing on two fronts. They're losing on a military front, basically, and they're losing on a PR front. And that I think that this entire article was in order to kind of cover up that, that specific piece of the puzzle. That, that doesn't mean they might not use strategic nukes, but I don't think this article had anything to do with nukes. And obviously everyone who is saying, the waves would, be radioactive, it would go back to Russia, it would affect many other countries. There are family members of Putin living in Great Britain. I believe his mother does, actually, or someone from his close family. This is not, I would not read it as reality at all. Now, just it's a political fiction on, whatever. That going to the bigger picture of what Ukraine could or could have not done and how that could be, it's much more complicated. And I agree with here that Ukraine had no choice. Ukraine did not
This
have a
this
choice.
this whole notion of could have and should have, I mean, obviously we have come a long way, but what Ken is saying, I think is very real. I mean, this whole situation can very quickly escalate to the Armageddon level, but let's look at it, what's happening right now. We haven't learned anything from World War One and Two. And that's what exactly was started to happen, that, the sides were forced to choose, the countries were forced to choose the side. And this is what exactly is happening. So actually, effectively, when the world is going to be in two camps, that's where the real, the scenario would occur. And what Ken is saying, ultimately, this is where it's going to be the actual tipping point. When the world is in two camps, effectively, you are not talking about just simply Armageddon. You are talking about, like, the World War III kind of thing, which is going to be ultimately pulling all the options on the table and then ultimately forcing it. And it's not just like we are talking about Europe. This is like the whole world we are talking about, like Taiwan coming into the picture. The South China Sea is becoming like, the whole new war game. And this whole scenario, just try to actually look at this, how the world is going to evolve at that point in time, because the countries are now forced to choose the sides. And this is exactly what happened in World War II. And this is going to actually disintegrate into, like, in a million pieces, because this time it's not going to be just simply one country who has got the power to actually exercise the nuclear, but it's going to be many countries, and everybody is going to be actually have the their fingers on the button. And this is just like gruesome,
Karam,
seriously.
I would say that we haven't actually learned our lessons since the Peloponnesian War, or when the Medes and Persians attacked Babylon. I mean, when did we ever learn the lesson? We don't, right? I mean, this has been going on since man came down from the trees.
Absolutely. I just wanted to point out, Jorge, you're absolutely right. And can I just point out very, very quickly that this particular version of Armageddon is in direct competition with another Armageddon. And when those two hit, we're going to have one super incredible, heaven knows what. There's a word to be developed yet. And the second Armageddon I'm talking about is, of course, the climate situation, because we're heading straight for that with eyes wide open and nothing planned.
Hey,
And
Pat,
to
we may
just wrap
not
this,
get
and
there.
and
This Ukraine situation, we may not even get it. We may not even get there. I mean, we may not have. I mean, we may not have 5 years if this thing gets out of control.
We'll have nuclear winter.
and just to tie this back to tech news, this disrupts everything in the sense that while we're tied and bound to this war, this Armageddon as we're calling it, There's also, in line with that, a technological war that's happening. The budgets of all the countries who are developing are now tied. And by the way, silently, India is positioning itself to take advantage of that space. That redefines the lines in great ways in terms of power structure. I've been saying this since October of last year. I will say it again. When this shakes, what we know as a power structure changes completely.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think that that's this, what's happening right now, is a lot of the reason why we pulled out of Iraq and eventually Afghanistan. You can't fight a war on all fronts. And so, we've known that this is coming. And I think that this kind of let loose some of our military to focus on other parts of the world.
This is Irvin down at the bottom. I don't believe in fear and doom, and this everyone's talking about a nuclear war, and here's a room filled with people that believe in facts and really, I hope, sensible way of thinking and not emotional. Fear is based out of emotion. The fact being, how many of you understand exactly how uh, a nuclear bomb is actually launched and how many different layers it has to go through? Uh, Russia has about the same amount and even probably a little bit more checkpoints before a nuke can be launched as we do in the West. And I do believe that there are people on both sides of that turning the last key, even after they've gotten the codes, that are going to think real long and hard before this happens. And to hear a bunch of adults, educated people talk about the fear of nuclear, we haven't gotten there yet. One of the things that we should be talking about is the fact that the US, UK, and Russia screwed Ukraine in 1995 on the Budapest Agreement, that Ukraine gave up their nukes because they wanted to have their independence and wanted to have their own borders. And we signed an agreement that said we would protect them. And when Russia came in and took over Crimea, where were we? Where were you? Were any of you shouting about the fact that we did not fulfill our commitment? I guys, please understand that we didn't get here because of Russia. We got here because of us and being quiet and not stepping up and telling our government we needed to do something back then. And now we're faced with this. So everyone wants to cry about a nuclear winter. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we may get close, but I do think that there are people there that have common sense, that understand that they've seen the destruction in Japan, what a nuclear bomb can do. And I don't think anyone on this planet wants to go that
Yeah,
route.
Irvin, I
Now,
agree with most of what you said.
can't let me
Okay,
finish.
go
Can't
ahead.
let me finish,
Okay.
please. I just want you guys to kind of step back a moment, take a breath, because it's serious. This should not have occurred, but we could have first we had the opportunity to stop this almost 20 years ago or more, but we didn't. Now we are faced with this consequence of our choices, of our actions. Let's be responsible here. Let's call it like it is. So this is, I'm just, I would like for everyone to understand that Ukraine, just like the U.S., just like Britain, just like any other country on this planet, has a right to their borders. And if someone steps up and says we're going to step in and protect you, if somebody challenges that, and then we refuse to do that, I don't know what to say about the country or the governments that didn't fulfill their commitments. And now we want to cry foul. I don't know what Putin's going to do, but I do believe that there are some conscience of people on that side of the continent and on our side that will not let us go down the path of annihilating this planet. We will do more harm by letting climate change than a nuclear war will do. This is Irvin. Thank you for letting me interject. Thanks,
Yeah,
I
Karen.
so
really, I,
I want to respond to Eric because he was responding to me. Okay, so first of all, I agree like 90% of what he said. By the way, okay, and certainly I agree with on Crimea, and I mean there's a bunch of issues with Crimea, but I don't think it's appropriate to, revisit in this room. Um, but I generally agree that yeah, we should have situation should have been handled very differently. And Irvin, you're absolutely right that they have systems in place, and I believe my understanding is their fail-safe systems are probably better than ours in terms of the number of approvals you need. Okay, I actually thought the same thing you did, by the way, and still to some extent do, that there would be calmer heads than Putin that would prevail. Okay, but I do believe for that generals to basically push him out, there needs to have been, and there has not been yet, some the Russians had a legitimate, border concern, much the same that we would have if we were in that situation. Okay. And without that statement, okay, I'm not sure the Russian generals are going to push back on Putin. That's the problem. If Putin's just a lunatic, you're right. Somebody's going to stop him. Okay, but if it's more than that, if it's because we show no respect for Russia, that we could just I mean, think about from their perspective. Okay, you have all these ex Warsaw Pact countries that used to be in their kind of their orbit that are now in the Western orbit, and we've had this massive expansion of NATO. Okay, all these things that have happened, you're right, over 20 years. Okay, what do you think they're thinking when their reaction is that they have pride too? Okay, we left them no way to save face. Okay, if you want the Russian generals to stop Putin, you need to give them a way to save face. Okay,
I have a comment
Ken,
about that. I disagree.
Ken, one second. Ken, we have lived with 45, I don't know exactly how many miles south of the Key West is Cuba, but we have lived with the same type of issue. We did come up and we did stop the fact of Russia putting nukes in Cuba, but Cuba's still Cuba. It's still doing its thing. We,
It,
Ukraine, didn't start hollering towards or moving towards NATO until we let the Russians into Crimea. So I say once again, who is at fault here? Save face. You know, it's like we want to bow down and kiss this man's rear end because he's invaded another country, and now we need to give him a road
That's absolutely
and
not what he's
maybe
saying.
lay down a red carpet so he can get his butt out of there. I don't
You don't
believe that's necessary.
you don't bow down and kiss his right hand, but you acknowledge if you had a neighbor that moved in and they lined up machine guns facing your front door all along the property line, would you not feel threatened by that? And that's what Russia is concerned about. And for the West to not acknowledge that is the problem. Not and that's not to say that what Putin is doing is right. It's not. But if you at least acknowledge that, then the people of Russia will understand, oh, wait, they see it from our perspective. Also, maybe the guy who's in power who's threatening to throw nukes is a little bit imbalanced and maybe he shouldn't be in power because the rest of the world understands that we want our safety. It's the same if you walked out your front door every day and you looked to your right or left and your neighbor had guns facing your front door every day that you walked out, how would you feel? And that's how the Russian people, that's what they're being made to
And
feel.
that I hear you, but I'm going to tell you something. I walked out my parents walked out of their door almost every day, and someone burned a cross on if someone burnt a cross on our and we had guns in Texas. And so I understand your analogy, but once again, if I've got my gun and somebody comes into my yard, on my property, then I'm going to shoot them. I have a right to defend myself because that person has invaded my property. So And should I go back out there after I shot this guy? Say, "Oh, I'm really sorry for doing that, but you were about to burn my house down."
I think in the UK, there's a very different stance. You're absolutely not allowed to shoot. Well, firstly, we can't get access to guns, and if we could, we'd never be able to get any ammo at any sensible cost. But if somebody comes on your property, you absolutely cannot shoot them unless they're an immediate threat to your life. And the same goes for the police. You just cannot shoot somebody unless, well, most of the police here aren't armed anyway. I think there's a difference between a defensive posture and an offensive posture. The root cause does seem to be fear. One really trite expansion of that is false expectations appearing real. And I think it's a very healthy conversation to try and understand it from their point of view. I can understand that they're fearful. I can understand why they're fearful, but they are false expectations, I believe. I mean, NATO countries need to stop doing stupid shit like invading Iraq, sure, so, eat our own soup or whatever. But given that, it is a defensive stance, and there is no desire to go to Russia and get cold. So I don't understand it. It is fear, and we do need to enter exactly this sort of dialogue. So I'm glad people are talking about it. Sorry to interrupt.
I think if I
So,
could
so
just
may
the
I?
one thing I think that is super
I've been waiting
difficult
for a
with
long time for contribution, Alexandra. So can I please finish my thought first? Thank you. In response to what Ken said earlier, if you expect somebody that few words of recognition is going to change their mind for expansion and their vision of how power is so important for them and why it's so important for them to wage this war just because they not only want to cling on to this power, but they have this vision of expansion of previous USSR like glory. Few words of recognition are not going to change that mindset. And at the same time, the way we are thinking, how we are responding to certain words, that's not how Russian mindset is at all. Their fear is based in years and years of propaganda driven by their own government who wish to uh, have this power over their minds. And it's like a long, long, long history of that mindset that has developed. So, few words of encouragement is not going to change the way they think. They don't respond the way we do. And I can say that after multiple conversations with people from Russia and people from Ukraine and people who really know what's going on. So we are not perpetuating that fear. That fear has been created by their own autocratic government who wish to lead them this way because they wish to have this. They don't have democracy. Their leaders are not changing every 4 years. Their leaders are clinging to the power by fear, by manipulation, by expansion, by show of that power that they have and that they can invade anywhere. And whatever they are doing, especially Putin and his regime, is based in their own personal agenda. It has nothing to do with West. Yes, West has made mistakes, many mistakes, but if we just go ahead and say we were wrong this way, they are not having the same mindset as we do, that in response to some acknowledgement, Western minds respond in a way which is not present over there. So please make sure that you are making that distinction. And that's what they want, this fear-based mindset to spread everywhere, and that's how they are winning.
I
Arun,
do
thank you
not.
so much. This is fantastic what you said. And just to add one point to what you just said is that we cannot, even if they would be thinking like us, the trust is completely broken. So basically, the fear that the Russian people are feeling, and I totally agree with Arun in every detail that she said. If the fear that they have is so deeply rooted that just Stam saying coming over and saying we're coming in peace is just not, it's not gonna work. And this is cynically used by Russian, by propaganda, by Kremlin propaganda to mobilize people. So it's not, it's very complicated and it's very hard to unpack right now. Thank you.
Oh,
That's
not
Leon,
only
and that's
propaganda. They have been missing people, they have been killing people, they have been poisoning people. They don't let anybody live who show a little bit critical thinking or resistance. So it's not only words, they literally are killing their
yes.
own people. And that kind of fear cannot be moved away by any kind of apologetic stance by Western countries.
So
When
this
I said about propaganda, I mean towards the, that the West is going to attack. But what you are saying, the fear is rooted not based on propaganda only, and that we have to understand how traumatized Russian people are, to the extent that they are afraid to tell what they feel and think on that phone call. So when they're doing polls, you have two rubrics. When they're doing polls, they do two rubrics of people who are saying they support Putin and people who are saying they're supporting Putin but. And those people who are supporting Putin but, those people are actually not supporting Putin. But we don't not going to see that in the statistics because they will be still those people officially supporting Putin, but they would add something, clarifier, and that clarifier will indication for people who are taking polls in Russia that these people are actually against. So this is how complicated, this is how brainwashed, how terrorized people in Russia are. So okay, thank you, I'm done. Thank you.
this
If
is
I
Tyler,
may
this,
very quickly, if I may
Tyler,
very quickly, please, and then I will leave. But if I may very quickly, I do not
go ahead.
speculate on the feelings of an entire people or population. I do have relatives there, but I do not actually assume that their feelings reflect everyone else's. The only thing I can ever speak on or analyze or assume anyone else can analyze are objective facts. And what do we know? The only thing that we know that is a very concerning fact is that Putin wants to have, and he has said as much, he does not want to have NATO at his door. And what he is choosing to do is create buffer zones between the West, between NATO alliances and him, which means he's basically using countries to be battleground and citizen injure, like put their citizens in front of his own, so that he doesn't actually have invasion in his own land. This by itself is considered against a Geneva Convention. This is not an appropriate use of other populations. It is not an appropriate use of. This is not a reason or a reasonable debate over borders or anything like that. This is something where he has said what his intention and his reason are. We are not allowed to use other citizens' populations in order to make us feel safer. We are not allowed to annex other nations in order to make our populations feel more insulated from other outside threats. That is actually what we can go on, and that is something that I think is a reasonable way to look at and address this. If there's an issue that he wants to say, well, I'd prefer feeling more secure in another way, or there was another point of negotiation, I think that's a very valid point. He can come up with some other way, but he cannot use other countries and their citizenry to make himself and his people feel safer. That's just not acceptable. But I do think that Ken is actually correct, that, and he has said as much as well, that without leaving a means to save face, he will die on this front. And that is actually something that's also problematic, because we have to consider the resources that he has at hand and the number of people that are choosing to abstain from this entire conflict. Thank you.
What
this is
Putin
this
says and he does has a long history of contradiction. He says something, but he does completely opposite. We cannot trust his words.
this is Robert, real quick, and I'm just going to pose a question, and I'm not looking for an answer, but and then would love to hear the technology behind some of these other discussions going forward, whatever comes up. But anyway, are we certain that this is all Putin? Number one, and that there could be a component of the Russian populace that supports initiatives like these, maybe not totally exactly, but the real big question is, everybody's talking about Putin, but are we certain that the person who comes next is going to be better? And are we ready for another century where Russia will have another revolution?
Robert,
Okay.
Peter Zayon, who Tyler also follows, talks about how there's a vacuum in terms of ready people to take over. In the United States, there's a number of people who could take over leadership, but there's a vacuum right now. And as far as the people who support Putin, I know for a fact in conversations with Russian friends that it's kind of split by age. I mean, if you're older, you tend to support Putin, and if you're younger, and you've had access to social media and other forms of information that are not just the classical traditional forms of media, then you're thinking. And of those, some people are against, and some people, are for.
Okay,
Um,
Uh,
we gotta roll on. Hold on, I had a question for Chris,
Yep.
and
Welcome
it's
back.
this whole conversation that's gone on for about an hour now about Ukraine
Sorry, I'll
and
vent on for a
Russia
while.
and nuclear whatever is because there was a headline, um, which the headline itself is about a Russian news segment on Russia One and the reporter is called the Putin's mouthpiece. This particular reporter, and it shows actual footage, like computer rendered footage. I just tweeted out the tweet so you can watch the video from the Russian TV program, news program, and it shows a computer dramatization rendering of a nuclear submarine launching a nuclear
Sure.
torpedo, which would launch a what they're claiming to be a 500-meter tsunami, which would, and they show precisely where they would plan to do this, which is kind of in northern Ireland and UK, on the west coast of the UK,
Sure. That
on,
would be a good place to
on
do it.
kind of, yeah, the northern part of Northern Ireland, so that it would have minimal impact on Southern Ireland, and then
That's just them
and,
just trolling at that point.
right, and then but it also would impact Iceland ostensibly, and one part that was left out was, and they say this very clearly in the graphic, that it would cause nuclear radiation in that territory, which, by the way, that is the world supply of codfish right in that particular area. So my question is, Chris, how feasible is this dramatization computer video?
So I have not seen the video specifically, but I am familiar with the weapon system. I've been studying it for a while. It's legit. I mean, that's the key takeaway. The nuclear weapons do exist of this scale that can do this amount of damage. Um, that that capability is not something that a lot of people are used to. After the end of the Cold War, we kind of had this idea that nukes kind of went away, and then we lost the excuse to fight. The end of history. Let's all move on. And everyone gets McDonald's, and no one will ever declare war on anyone ever again. Um, that was the idea. Uh, in the background, a lot of militaries continue to experiment with nuclear devices. It's just that they do them via simulator rather than doing it, with detonations in the atmosphere or underground. Whenever you hear someone talk about bragging about their supercomputer systems, about Japan has a supercomputer system, or America has a thing with Oak Ridge Laboratories having a giant supercomputer, and they say, we can do climate change, we can do weather. Yeah, that's great. The real reason they get sponsored for that, though, is they're doing nuke simulations in the background, and it's not as something that you talk about in public as much. The specific simulations that you're tested on is for doing those simulations. Now, part of the thing about that with climate change is that you can do climate change via just waiting for the climate to change. You can predict weather out via sensors. But ostensibly, what nuclear devices are, they're on such a scale and order of magnitude with heat dissipation, etc. They are an artificial way to create a local weather system, as a way of modeling it, essentially, is just the mixing of air, fire, etc. Um, so Russia is also demonstrating with this not just that they have the nuclear, submarine capabilities. They're also saying, by the way, we also still have the ability to develop our own weapons and simulator as well, which is a technological capability that they're kind of bragging about here. But yeah, the ability to wipe out large sections of stuff, it's something that's really more interesting with this is that the reason why this one is particularly dangerous is the idea of whether or not it's with fallout radiation or not. So in a normal nuclear device, and Tyler, I can make it as brief or as long as you want with things. I'll just save for like a 60-second one. We can keep going if you like. But a 60-second version of this is that we know how to make nukes that are fallout free, that generate almost no radiation. Within a few hours, you can just walk outside. There's no problem whatsoever. We also know how to create nuclear devices that go the other direction and cause so much radiation that it leaves an area uninhabitable for decades. Now, that's without intervention. There are ways that you can recover from that. It's just you have to move a lot of earth You're basically scraping the top millimeter across the entire terrain. In an area as large as Britain, you would need to literally to build a defensive measure just for this device, just for this capability. It is possible. It's difficult. If you haven't been designing for it, it's going to be a freaking pain. It's going to be expensive. Now, not stated in this propaganda is that Britain also, since, last 50 years or so, has also had the capability of wiping out Moscow and St. Petersburg, etc., literally within less than an hour. That's what a lot of the nuclear submarine stuff around. That's the other bases, etc. The bombers that are positioned, NATO, etc. The key thing about it that keeps the system of no matter what super weapons we create, no matter what devices are in check, the thing that keeps it in play is the idea we have mad doctrine saying if you wipe out me, I'll wipe out you. And this depends on having back channels of communication, layers of, hey, we're going to make a weapon system. That okay with you guys? Hey, that's not okay. Well, maybe we do this thing. Maybe we do that one. SALT treaties, etc. That back channel diplomacy has been breaking down. And right now, the thing that's actually most dangerous about seeing this on their state television is the fact that saber rattling is completely ignoring the older system of saying, hey, let's coordinate carefully so we don't accidentally nuke each other. That rhetoric is gone. The other thing is that in back channel diplomacy, I've seen some things that are non-public where people that negotiate some of those original treaties are freaking out because they're saying that's not, those discussions just aren't happening right now. So essentially Putin's being put into a corner, and it's a dangerous situation because we're in unmapped territory here. So yeah, I can go on, but that's the basic genesis. The tech is legit. The political threat is real. And it is worth taking seriously. That's the main thing. There are defensive measures, but it'll be difficult.
And hence the reason why Ken said what he said, which I agree with, and hence the reason why we don't have actual boots on the ground in Ukraine, because, there is an escalation theory. And it was like a month ago that I read it off into this room a couple of times. And so there's a lot of steps to have to get before we get to that point. But yeah, I agree with you, Chris. But that's why Ken said what he said.
Very briefly, we do have a nuclear weapons club where we talk about some of these issues with things.
Can't hear you, Chris.
Can't
By
hear
the way,
you.
we do have a nuclear weapons club that started with things. We've got almost 1,000 people in it, where we talk about nuclear weapons design, non-proliferation, how different mitigation measures, defensive stuff, all sorts of things, the physics involved, etc. We've got some really interesting people that come by there. If any people are interested in this topic, we can talk in a breakout room about that too.
Okay, we got to get back to the news because I got to jump out myself. So a fast few headlines, and then we can circle back to Ukraine if you want. Katerina shared one that the CIA reaches out to Russians opposed to war in Ukraine. According to CBS News, the CIA on Monday released a text-only instructions in Russian on several of its social media channels, including YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. I can tell you what they're doing, but let me see if CBS knows what they're doing. They're reaching out to Russians opposed to the war in Ukraine, a secure way to contact the agency amid concerns for their safety as the Russian government continues crackdown on outside information and opposition to Kremlin's month-long invasion. Quote, we are providing Russian language instructions on how to safely contact the CIA via our dark website or our reputable CPN. For those who feel compelled to reach us because of the Russian government unjust war, a CIA official told CBS News, our global mission demands that individuals can contact us securely from anywhere. The agency on Monday released text-only instructions including YouTube, Facebook, Instagram for accessing its dark website, which has shown value in securely eliciting information from individuals all over the world since it was first launched in 2019. Accessing the site requires a browser called Tor or the Onion router, which protects a user's identity by encrypting their web traffic. The CIA hopes it will help concerned citizens in Russia, as well as Russian soldiers in Ukraine, safely contact the agency with information. Western assessments have routinely indicated that Russia's military forces in Ukraine are suffering from low morale, with occasional reports of soldiers refusing to carry out orders or sabotaging their own equipment. So what's going on here is the CIA knows that there's lots of Russians who oppose what's going on in Ukraine, including people in the military, including people very high up in the Kremlin. So they're giving a red carpet for those people to share very valuable information that the CIA can then put to good use, which they very much have, like the sinking of the Moskva ship in the Black Sea is now understood to be in part a cooperation with U.S. intelligence, which may have been informed by Russians with information that they shared with the CIA, because it turned out there were an incredible concentration of very high-ranking Russian officials on that ship at the time that it sank. Now,
This could
so
also be a public cover for the fact that we've have near omniscience for the cell phone network.
yeah. Anyway, I mean, it's
things going on. We've got fog of war in play, so there's a lot of things going on, and a lot of reasons publicly stated versus the real reasons. And I think that the cell phone coverage one is one of the more fascinating stuff, especially considering the sorts of things you can do with that with modern intelligence.
Well, the other thing that this does is it's not. Gets really interesting because the CIA being so public about the fact that they're doing this is going to drive the Kremlin, and particularly Putin, absolutely crazy, and force him into very reclusive type of paranoia, as he probably should be in this instance, and that makes it very challenging to operate in that kind of an environment. So Katerina shares that Russia just threatened to destroy Ireland and Britain with a nuclear tsunami. That's what kick-started off that whole conversation. And then that brings me to the end of all of my tweets. So you all can continue on however you like. I need to jump out. But I wanted to give everyone a chance to share their thoughts and opinions on anything before we wrap. So feel free.
Bye.
Cheryl's done.
Tyler.
Anyone
Yeah.
else?
No, I can be here to close the room later. Tyler can move on.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll catch you all
Same
tomorrow.
bad time, same bad channel.
Thank you, everybody.
May the force be with you.
Thank you so
Oh,
much,
done,
Tyler,
done
as
with your
usual.
training?
Thank you,
Okay.
Tyler.
See you,
Tech
everybody.
News, Tech News Africa is in half an hour.
Oh yeah, that's
Oh,
If you
yes,
wanna
yes, yes. I'm
join us.
going to pin.